Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the DM's Journal in Out of the Abyss. I'm your DM, Anthony, and I'm slowly getting back on my horse of doing these regular journals. There was a while where things got pretty busy, and there may be one more busy period like that this summer because apparently everyone has chosen the next 2 months to get married that I know. So there might be a bit of a lag again, but I'll try my best to avoid that. Today, I'm only 2 sessions behind in that I didn't do one for the previous week, and we just played last night, so that shouldn't be too rough. And I am looking because I'm not. There's no kind of rush for me doing this video this morning, and because there isn't as much content to just catch you, the viewer, up on. I'll get back to a little bit more of the thought process that I've gone into instead of just kind of here's what happened. But with that being said, I will do a here's what's happened because that's obviously an important part of this as you follow along with our adventure as well. So 2 weeks ago when we sat down to play, we picked up our adventures continuing on the road from Neverlight Grove to Blingdenstone. They had just finished leaving the Silken Ways, and they had unfortunately and sadly lost their paladin cleric, Sir Robert Bastion, along the way. He was overtaken by giant spiders because unbeknownst to him, he had become cursed by Lolth when he desecrated her shrine to steal the onyx eyes of the spider statue way back in our very first play session. So it's always sad when one of the characters that's been with the group for a long time dies, but at the same time, it was a narratively dramatic death. Basically a horde of giant spiders kind of bypassed everyone to just encroach on him and attack him, and then after being down, continue to just sting and bite and web until unfortunately Sir Bastion had passed away. And so they made it to the other side of the gorge in which these giant spider webs kind of connected and continued about their way. So in that first of the 2 sessions that I'll be talking about today, I was down 2 players, bringing me from 5 to 3, which is a little rough, and I didn't really want to do that. And after some kind of back and forth communication, we went from it's not happening to 4 players to it's not happening to 5 players because I wound up getting 2 people to kind of come in and special guest. So we had Ryan come back and introduce his new character since Sir Bastion died. We had Bard showed up to play, and we also had Colby show up to play. So our 2 missing members were our gnome sorcerer G-Man, as we call him, as well as our bard, like our actual classic bard, Ken LaFlaunt. So what we wound up doing is we brought in Ken? Yeah, Ken, we were missing Ken. Why do I feel like I was down to 2 players? No, it's because that 3rd player introduction, that's all. So what I had is I had one of my buddies who has started playing D&D with us more, which I've been pretty happy about. He came in and he wound up playing kind of like, the class itself I think was a fighter, but he was basically like a drunken sea captain. And the other one, I had another friend come in and he wound up playing this, a dwarven battle master who had kind of come into the Underdark seeking riches and got lost along the way. And so what happened is I just had the 2 of them. The way we set the story was that the twins, Topsy and Turvy, the Deep Gnome twins, more NPCs that have been with them since the beginning, they kind of disappeared. And no one really knew where they went. So Jim Jar and G-Man and Ken said, we're going to go find the twins and we'll meet back up with you. And so that was narratively the out as to where they went. And it was a good setup for the session we just had last night, but we'll get to that. So it was essentially just Bard and Colby kind of walking through the Underdark, and one of the encounters that they had was they came into a large cavern where what started as a slight buzzing or ringing in their ears grew until it kind of was too painful to bear, and then all of a sudden stopped. And it turned into voices that they could hear. And the voices they could hear were familiar things that were tormenting them. So, Colby heard the demonic call of his patron power who, the demonic queen who grants him his abilities, screeching after him and, telling him that he'll never escape and things like that. And Bard heard his father calling out for him that he needs help, and that Bard is nowhere to be found, and he's needed. And so the characters had to make a couple insanity, madness saving throws, which I think only Bard failed, but it only resulted in, it was a short-term or a temporary madness that really wound up having no effect. But I think for the duration, he was under the idea that he had drank a potion of cloud giant strength, so he thought he was much stronger than he was, which could have made for some funny stuff. But again, because these things are happening on almost a daily travel basis, if something doesn't happen almost immediately after, it's kind of like, well, whatever. But that being said, it does still increase that character's madness level, which means that if they should fail, another save down the road, it could be an indefinite madness. So it all adds up over time. But while they were in this really terrifying cave, they kind of rounded the corner and bump almost into this dwarf, which my friend Jerry was playing. This is the dwarf battle master, and his name was Baldwin. And Baldwin was great for the session. He had a reason to adventure with the party, or at least to kind of hook up with them to get to Blingdenstone, where he thought he could find some riches. It just kind of, when surfacers meet up in the Underdark, as long as no one's aggressive towards each other, it's pretty much an easy, let's stick together because it's crazy down here. So that's what they wound up doing. And as they kind of continued on forward, they came across this giant pit of muck, like just a pool of mud. And the players chose to kind of wade through that. And fortunately, Bard being very strong, he jumped in and just kind of pulled everyone with him. And as they were just coming up on the other side, they noticed this creature come around the corner, and it's a troglodyte. But this troglodyte has two companions with him. One is this kind of roguish-looking man, and the other is this guy who's just kind of looks like he's drunk and all dirty. And they speak to this party that they run into, and the troglodyte introduces himself as Skris, and Skris has he's a member of the Society of Brilliance, which is a fun little thing that I've been waiting to introduce, that I've been wanting to introduce, and I'm sure other members will pop up throughout the storyline. But essentially, the Society of Brilliance is like a small society of, I think, maybe 7 or 8 people or monsters, and that's the idea, is that they're monsters, but they're very intelligent monsters. They're like the uncommonly smart versions of things. So, for example, troglodytes, if you don't know what those are kind of like underground dwelling, cave dwelling lizard people almost, and they're very tribal. They're not super smart or anything, but Skris is extremely intelligent, and so as a member of the Society of Brilliance, these monsters go around investigating different things in the Underdark to try and solve the various problems of the Underdark. So he says, well, Skris, which I tried to throw on a serpentine voice for, and kind of did like I found this man wandering through the Underdark with his companion, something like that. That's not really what it was, is he had found these two, and they were looking to get to Blingdenstone, and Skris had said, well, I'm kind of going that way as well, and you're welcome to join me until then, and they kind of warily accepted. And now that Skris had bumped into these other two, he kind of said, well, these other 3 rather, he says, well, why don't the 5 of you guys get together and take it from here? I've given you general directions, and I kind of have more important things to do. And so then he kind of opens a portal, because the Society of Brilliance members are able to teleport to other members of the Society of Brilliance. So a portal kind of opens up, and just as he's walking through, he stops and turns around, and he says, by the way, I should note that if you are going to Blingdenstone, there's been an unusual amount of oozes we've noticed migrating in that direction. And then walks through the portal, and that's it. And everyone's kind of not really sure what to make of that last sentence, but they're like, whatever, more surfacers, we should get together. So the roguish male, by the name of Valdusen, is Ryan's new character that he's playing. And he kind of jumped into the party, and the story was, and the drunken pirate whose name is Dirt. is played by my friend Joe for this one session because we needed an extra man. And the idea was that Valdusin had chartered a ship to bring him to an entryway of the Underdark. And as the ship kind of got near that location, the currents of the underground river that feeds like the Dark Lake basically squalled the ship, smashed it on rocks. The whole thing sank. They were thrown overboard, sucked down into the Underdark and through the Dark Lake, and that's kind of how they wound up there. And so the reason why Dirt is just drunk and not having a good time is because he's lost his ship. He doesn't know if he'll make it out of this alive. He's thinking this is the worst job he's ever taken. And Valdusin is just kind of happy to be there. He seems very confident. So these 5 people were then the party. So they moved forward, and as they moved forward, they then found themselves at the entryway of a network of tunnels. And they could hear what sounded like giggling or laughing echoing throughout these networked tunnels. And just then, they see 2 hook horrors come out of a tight passageway and run past the tunnel they're going through into another tight passageway. And a hook horror, if you don't know what that is, it looks like a weird combination of like a bird and a turtle with scythes for hands. If I was really savvy with YouTube and editing, I might at this point interject a picture of one to show you what that looks like. But I'm not, and this is a game of pen and paper tabletop anyway, so just use your imaginations. It's large, it has a shell, it has a beaked mouth, and it's kind of from the elbow up are just scythed hands, hence the name Hooked Horrors. And so a pair of them runs by. And the players are like, well, that was odd. And as they go through, 2 or 3 of the players kind of move forward into this network of tunnels, and the other 2 are like, well, I want to investigate where they just came from. And as they look through, they notice that there is a hunting party of gnolls that is chasing these hook horrors. And then at that point, combat starts. And it was a really interesting combat. The hook horror hunt is a kind of designed encounter within the book, but I think that it's meant to happen earlier on, perhaps for the adventurers, but I didn't really see it making sense there. So I put it in here, and I just beefed up the encounter because it's meant to be just like a bunch of gnolls and like a pack lord, but all my party's level 5, close to level 6 type of thing, and so that would not have been very challenging for them at all. So instead what I did is I treated all of the regular gnolls as pack lords, and the one that was supposed to be a pack lord, I put him as a Claw of Yenug, if I'm pronouncing that right. And so that actually fits the story better, but I won't get into that quite yet. So these gnolls kind of initiate combat, and we got to see some of the new tricks that Valdusin could pull out of his hat, which proved useful for the party. It was a close fight, but at the end of the day, a combination of teamwork, and Bard just kind of hacking and slashing away with his newly acquired Dawnbringer sword, as left to him in the will and testament of Sir Robert, along with Sir Robert's name and titles and properties, estates and whatnot. But in the end, even Bard was downed. And so what happened was we had our dwarf battlemaster basically played flawlessly. He just carved a bloody path through these gnolls with his, I think, I don't know if it's his hammer or an axe. I can't remember what he was using. But, you know, his abilities to basically, through expertise of combat, using his, I forget what they're called, something dice. Anyways, he can add d8s to, like, hit and to damage and to hinder people. And it was great. He really helped the party out quite a bit. So they finished this massive combat, and the one thing that did surprise me is that once they were done that combat, which by the way Dirt died in, the gnolls, after they downed him, just kind of started ripping him open and eating him. So unfortunately that was it, but it was fine. It was kind of designed that way since this was a one-off guest appearance. So Dirt died. But aside from that, one thing that did kind of surprise me was that after that fight, they gave no thought as to what happened to the hook horrors, or where they went, and if they should try and find them, and, you know, were they hostile or were they just being hunted, and, you know, or even if they would start hunting the party now, who knows. But they picked up a few precious stones worth some gold off of the leader of this hunting party, and by and large that was it. Then they left, and so upon finding their way out of this network of tunnels on the other end, they happened to bump into Jim Jar and Ken LaFlaunt and G-Man, as well as Jim Jar and the twins, and basically they're like, "Oh wow, we're so happy that we found you, and who's your new companion? And we have some things to tell you about the twins." And then that's where we kind of called it for there. Baldwin, at the conclusion of everything he'd been through with the party, essentially says, "You guys are bad luck. This is I never had problems like this in the Underdark until I met you people." So he's like, "You do your own thing. I think I'm better off on my own," which was a way to exit that character out. But at the same time, I think that it may be funny to have him be a reoccurring character where possible, as this dwarven battle master who appears, kind of saves the day, but is always like, "Just get away from me. I don't want to be around you guys." Which is really narratively funny with this party as well, because as I've noted in other journals, they just roll so poorly most of the time, and so they really are bad luck, and the fact they've made it this far is actually amazing. But good on them to kind of overcome the challenges. So that's where we ended it for that particular session, and that transitions us now into our play session last night. And we had everyone was able to make it out last night. So we had Valdusin, we had Bard, we had Ken LaFlaunt, we had Colby, we had G-Man, and we picked up exactly where we left off, and we said, I had texted some information to Ken, and Ken said, "Well, we found the twins, and we know why they ran away, and they basically came clean and said that they're actually infected with lycanthropy, and they're were-rats, and that's the reason they left Blingdenstone in the first place, is that they're afraid of prosecution they may face, and that's why they took off when they did, because with us now being as close to Blingdenstone as we are, they weren't sure if they wanted to actually go back to that city. But we convinced them that we'll keep them safe and that they're with us, and we'll figure it out when we get there." To which the gnome twins Topsy and Turvy agreed. And I don't get a lot of opportunity, because again, this is my first time DMing a full narrative book from Wizards of the Coast, and this particular one just gives you so many NPCs to work with, and there's less now. But it seems almost that every time we lose one, we almost gain one, because we have the Sword Dawnbringer itself is intelligent and has a personality. The gelatinous cube Glabagool, who fell through the webbings 2 sessions ago, that was another NPC. He was sentient and could talk. So there's lots and lots of NPC roleplay, but I do like role playing the twins when I get a solid opportunity to do so, because I intentionally want to make sure the players have that creepy twin feel, where they're completing each other's sentences or responding at the same time in a way that can be unnerving. So I'll say, Topsy says, "We were nervous," and Turvy says, "Of Blingdenstone," and Topsy says, "Because we left there in the first place," and Turvy says, "Because of our lycanthropy." And the players, they get the vibe, and I think they enjoy it, and it's kind of fun. But so we did a little role play there and got the information across. And then Jim Jar says, "Okay, well, we're like maybe a day and a half out from Blingdenstone at this point, so let's get a move on." So he's leading them along the way, all 5 of the party, plus the 3 NPCs that are still with them, and they get to a point where Jim Jar says, "Okay, hold on, this pass looks different than I remember." And the party's like, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, it's a lot more narrow than I recall it being. I don't think it used to be this way, but I am sure we're going in the right direction." And a couple of players are doing insight and perception checks, and they rolled, I think, poorly. And the idea was, well, if Jim Jar says that's the right way, it's the right way. So they start walking through this narrow, kind of 10-foot wide passage, so they can only walk 2 abreast at most. And as they are walking down, they see that on their left is what appears to be a set of iron bars that have been put into the stone of the wall. And so the party kind of stops, and a couple people that are in the front leading the way do perception checks. and they don't roll very well. I said, well, you know, you can see that the floor inside of this through the bars looks lumpy and uneven, like there's piles of something. And they say, okay. So Ken says, well, I'm gonna go up and kind of rattle the bars and see what's there. And so he does so, and I say, okay. So you start rattling on the bars, and you're looking through, and you see this lumpy floor, and as you're kind of taking a closer look and shaking the bars, you're realizing that some of these lumps on the floor are remains, and you know you're jostling some of them. You see a horned helmet fall off of then what reveals a skull with the skull's been crushed, like caved in, and it's at that moment that Ken realized that his rattling had actually opened the gate. The gate was not actually locked or latched, and so there's about this much room now of the gate opening from the wall. And he looks at that, and then he looks there, and then there's this horn blow, and this giant rumbling that happens, and a boulder falls down on this side, and a boulder falls down on this side, and now they're trapped in this little gully kind of passageway, and Ken says, okay, I run into the cage, because up above, creatures that they couldn't see at that point in time on other alcoves about 30 feet up had set an ambush, and so combat was starting. Now, in addition to these, I had put orogs up there, and for those of you that don't know what orogs are like intelligent versions of orcs. So they're better equipped, they're better armored, and they're smart. So they can actually, like, you know, engage in real battle tactics on their own, and set traps and things like this. So what they had done is they had carved out or dug out an alcove on the bottom of this pass, and then they had set in an iron cage, and in the cage they had set an Umber Hulk, and an Umber Hulk is a very classic D&D monster. It's a huge kind of, if you imagine an ogre that, you know, had a baby with a beetle, and so it looks like this giant beetle ogre thing, and it's a very interesting creature. And so what they had done had set this trap with the Umber Hulk down below, and then they would stand on cliffs up above and just whip javelins down. And so this was the plan that they had concocted. This was the encounter that I had planned for them. This was the last big, are we going to die here, or are we going to make it to Blingdenstone in one piece? So the fight started, and the Umber Hulk, you know, raises itself up off the ground, one of these big lumps that they saw on the floor, and it finds itself eyes to eyes with Ken. And one of the things that an Umber Hulk does is that if you can see it, then you have to take unless you specifically state that you're looking away from it, which might do things like, oh, you're not looking at it, but you're fighting it, so you have disadvantage and blah, blah, blah. If you can see it, then you have to take a charisma saving throw or become confused, and then what you do on your turn is determined by a randomly rolled d8. So I thought that was a cool function, and so and that had a few effects on people. Some people got confused and did their turn doing nothing. Some people Ken actually failed that turn and had to randomly attack something close to it, but the Umber Hulk was the only thing nearby, so that worked out for him. But all the monsters got a surprise round of combat. They did a little bit of damage to a couple characters with the Orogs throwing their javelins, and the Umber Hulk confused Ken for his first turn. So that after that surprise round, we went into regular initiative order, and the battle was on, and it was a tough fight. The Umber Hulk and the Orogs both have a high AC. The Umber Hulk can hit like a truck. It gets 3 separate attacks, and I was wary of that. I didn't want it to just kind of say boom, 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 and you're dead. It's not very smart. It is animalistic. So I remember in its first turn with Cole, because Ken had chosen to jump into the cage with the Umber Hulk, not knowing it was there. After confusing it, it had basically smashed him with one hand, and then smashed him with the second hand. And I said, okay, well, with that one, you're thrown out of the cage and smash against the wall outside and take another d4 points of bludgeoning damage. But I didn't use the bite attack, because that would have been no good. I feel like that probably would have downed Ken right there. Which, you know, I think at this point the Umber Hulk is realistically just going into a berserk frenzy, and just kind of flailing its fists around, and that would knock Ken out. And then the Umber Hulk moved out of its cage into the main causeway, which was interesting too because it's only 10 feet wide, and he's a large creature, so he kind of takes up the entirety. And some of the party was on this side of it, and some of the party was on this side of it, and there was an Umber Hulk between them, and these Orogs raining javelins down. And those javelins are only doing like D6 plus some minor bonus, but when you got 4 of them being thrown and it's every turn and you can't really do anything yet to stop them, it's a significant challenge. So long story short, because I don't want to get into all the nitty-gritties of the combat, is at the end of the day, it was a close fight, but the combined arms were able to lay the Umber Hulk low finally, and then it was a challenge of getting all the Orogs. And I think they were able to do so through a combination of really well-rolled attacks by Valdusen, who used his magical ice crossbow to essentially kill at least half of the Orogs, because he rolled like 3 crits during that one combat session. So that was pretty amazing. And one of them was because he was rolling D8 for damage. He rolled a crit, and then he rolled max damage on an 8, so it was 16 plus his bonuses, and he almost like one-shotted one of them from the health that it had left. So that was pretty impressive, and it was very, very cool to see that character get to strut his stuff a little bit. One thing actually I should note from the previous session that during that Knoll Hook Horror Hunt is that Valdusen was downed during that fight, and Colby was the only other conscious character nearby, and the one who kind of went to defend Valdusen's body. And he noticed something when he was near Valdusen, and that was that he looked completely different all of a sudden. He had totally different features. He had long blonde hair and sleek elven facial features and pointed ears. And then, once the fight was over and Valdusen had been revived, his appearance once again changed into what Colby originally knew it to be. And so now there's a little bit of tension between those characters, because Colby knows that Valdusen is not everything he appears to be, and this concerns him, and it's something that will come back up in now the current session I'm talking about. But either way, during the end of this fight, we had another tragic moment where in his berserker rage, Bard took Dawnbringer and climbed up the wall to one of the alcoves where the last 2 Orogs were throwing their javelins, successfully climbed up, pressed them back into the alcove so he could stand up, and even took a couple swings at each one of them and dealt some pretty significant damage. But then the Orogs just laid into him with great axes, and the first one damaged him, and the second one downed him, and that allowed Bard, as a half-orc, to basically say, "Okay, I stand back up out of sheer determination with 1 HP automatically," which is a great little racial ability, and would have helped out in a lot of different ways, except the initiative order did not go in his favor. And so I came back around to those orcs, and they killed him. And they didn't. And I don't mean to say that they downed him and then delivered the killing blow to his unconscious corpse. In fact, after Bard was downed, some of the other players cast some really nifty spells. One person cast Minor Illusion to. One person casted a spell that made it look like a second Bard that was still healthy and alive, kind of materialized where that corpse was and jumped over the edge down back into the ravine. And then another person cast Minor Illusion on the body of the unconscious real Bard to essentially make it look like the orcs or the Orogs had only defeated an illusionary version of Bard, and the real Bard had jumped away, when in fact it was the opposite. And so then some interesting things happened. The next 3 rounds of combat, really the combat was done in 2 rounds, but the next 2 or 3 rounds of combat, the one Orog steps forward, trips over the invisible, illusionary body of Bard, fails his dex save, and just falls 30 feet to the ground. Took 14 or so damage from that fall. Did a little bit more damage, but ultimately he was done. The second one stepped up and started throwing a few more javelins, but again, I think Valdusin, finished that Orog off with his crossbow again, his crossbow. Now here's where things got kind of sad, is that over those 2 or 3 turns, because no one was able to actually get to Bard, because Bard was 30 feet up on this alcove, is Autumn Willow failed all 3 of her death saving throws in a row, and so Bard bled out. It was really sad and unfortunate, and there were various mixed reactions from the group. Valdusin, who hardly knew Bard, had kind of a, oh wow, the big guy went down, and G-Man is who's known Bard longer than Valdusin, but not as long as some of the other party members, is kind of like, oh my god, I can't believe we've lost another one in almost as many days, type of thing. And Colby's really broken up, because this now makes Colby, aside from the NPCs, the last surviving escapee from Valkenvelve. That was it. It was really just him and Bard at that point. Now Bard is gone. Ken LaFlaunt, who's been with the party since, session 2, but not necessarily original escapee of Valkenvelve. They found him kind of wandering around, although I'm sure he was a prisoner at some point. Is at a point too where he's trying to think of ways to save him, and he keeps coming up with this cockamamie idea of cutting the corpse up into pieces and then stuffing it in the bag of holding, and then getting all of those pieces to someone who can basically cast resurrection within 10 days. And so he kind of started to try and do that, and Colby said, no, we're not cutting them up. We're not going to do that. And so they took Dawnbringer and the note from Sir Robert that was intended for Bard, that Bard had read, and a few other little knickknacks, and then they made a makeshift gurney out of a couple javelins and a cloak, and they put his body on that and started kind of carrying him behind. And so that was sad. I was disappointed. I mean, it's not a stupid character death. But it was just unfortunate, and what do you do about that? Because it's the player rolling a death saving throw, and they fail 3 times in a row. Sometimes that's the way it goes, and so R.I.P. Bard. Yep. So for the rest of that session, Autumn Willow actually spent the time to create her next character, which will thankfully at this point be very easy to introduce, I think, because we're coming up on the next area of major civilization. So as they went forward, they figured their way out of this collapsed tunnel by Colby just saying, everyone get in the cage, and then whipped a fireball around the corner and took cover in the alcove, and the fireball the force of it blew the collapsed rubble that was blocking the way outwards, and they had a way out. So they continued on their journey, and then the next thing that they encountered was, they said, over the distance, over this next gravelly hill, you see a glow of light below. And what you can kind of make out are small figures around a large cave entrance that's, supported by wooden beams, and it looks like there's a railroad coming out of it, and these small creatures are pushing what look like mine carts. And the characters are saying, well, what do they look like? He said, oh, they look like Jimjar. They look like Deep Gnomes. He said, oh, interesting. So Ken, walks forward and says, oh, hello. And, and there's one Deep Gnome standing on a little mound of dirt, kind of barking orders at everyone else. And everyone stops what they're doing and looks over, and they see this ragtag party of surfacers with Valdusin is limping along, barely conscious, and they have a dead half-orc on a gurney, and everyone just stops and looks, and this guy on the mount steps down and says, hey, what are you all doing down here? What is this? These surfacers, and what's wrong with your friends? And a couple of miners with their pickaxes come up from behind him, and they can see a fancy crossbow on this guy's back. And the characters start making persuasion rolls, which Ken is very good at. We may be coming into Ken's element here in Blingdenstone, we'll see. But, he basically, with Jimjar, convinces this guy who goes by the name Dasko Pickshine. And they say, look, we're escapees. The drow are chasing us. We have injured friends. Like, we're just looking for shelter. We're trying to get to Blingdenstone. And as they're telling the story, they make some good checks. And Dasco basically says, well, anyone who's an enemy of the drow is a friend of the Pickshines. And I'm Dasco Pickshine, and this is Pickshine Mine. And they can see the gnomes have carts of everything from iron and copper to precious things like gemstones and mithril and adamantine and that type of stuff. So he informs them, like, you're welcome to stay here and gain some short rest. But soon we're loading up this caravan to actually take our latest load to Blingdenstone. And the characters say, yeah, absolutely. And they say, well, in fact, if you're going to Blingdenstone, do you mind if we come with you? And Daskal considers it and says, actually, yeah, the extra security would be great. I'd appreciate it if you came with us. So he said, great. So they got a little short rest in, and then they loaded up. And we had it basically look like 4 stagecoaches. The one in the rear, the caboose, so to speak, all the miners were in. The 3 in the middle were the cargo carts. And the one in front was where Dasco was, as well as the party, kind of hanging onto the sides of the cart as they go. And these carts are pulled by these giant cave badgers that the Deep Gnomes use as kind of beasts of burden. And so they're going along, and they're getting a little bit of the history of Blingdenstone from Pickshine. I can't remember how they asked it, but they asked a really good question, like, well, what's the story here? Like, why do you hate the drow so much, and this, that, and the other thing? And he basically said, well, Blingdenstone was a thriving Deep Gnome community, many years ago, but a drow army came and laid siege to the city, and anyone that they didn't slaughter or drag back to Menzo Branzan in chains was basically driven to the surface. And he says, if the players have informed him of the fact that they've been encountering demons, and Dasco found this very disconcerting, and says, well, you guys should probably talk to the Diggermatox. And they're like, well, who's that? And it's like, well, Senny, and I can't remember the guy's name offhand, but it's like the Diggermatox are like the de facto monarchy of Blingdenstone right now. It was their planning and resourcefulness and literal resources that got the expedition together that originally set out to reclaim Blingdenstone. And the whole of the settlement is not yet reclaimed. There are many sections of Blingdenstone that are still walled off or caved in passages with inaccessible parts that are still dangerous and all kinds of things. I said, oh, so why is it like this? I said, yes, well, that's because the drow basically came in and destroyed everything, and we're just in the process of retaking it. So at that moment, as they go forward, they see figures appear in the outline of the torchlight on the caravan up ahead in the tunnel, and they see 3 figures that look like they're humanoid, but as the light illuminates them more, they have rat features. And so these they come upon these were-rats, and Dasco basically takes his crossbow off his bag and says, not more of these damned were-rats. And goes to aim his crossbow, and then combat starts. And so the combat was not overly difficult. I think that they killed 2, and the third one, knowing that nothing good was coming of this, ran off through the tunnels, and they lost him. So they defeated the encounter. But one very significant thing happened during that encounter. Ken was bitten by one of the were-rats and failed his con saving throw. And so whether the character understands it or not, which I think he does, that could very well mean that he is infected with lycanthropy. He knows he's been bitten, but he wouldn't know if he's actually infected. And the other thing is that he did an Arcana check and couldn't determine if he was infected, how he would even get rid of that. So Pickshine sees this, and he says, that you got problems there, son. He said, you got to get that figured out sooner rather than later. So that could be an interesting side story to come of this very minor kind of skirmish that happened. So they get back on their carts. They make way again to Blingdenstone, And one of the things that the characters are saying to Dasco was like, well, if you guys have been attacked by the drow before, and you're just kind of setting up this new settlement, and you seem pretty willing to just bring us into your city, like how well defended is it really? And Dasco says, well, number one, you got vouchers from my kinsmen, so to speak. It's like Jim Jar vouches for you, and the twins, as strange as they look, seem to think you're okay. So you're friendly with other deep gnomes. I said, but on top of that, you just wait and see until you get there. And so they show up at Blingdenstone, and Dasco says to them, I'm going to do 3 things for you guys. As a thank you for helping me out. He says, first off, I want to give you these. And he gives each of the characters one very uniquely cut gemstone. And he says, these gems are fit to be spell gems. And the character's like, oh, what's a spell gem? And he says, well, spell gem is a special thing that we create here in Blingdenstone. It is a magical gem in which a spell can be stored and then cast one time by someone, even if they couldn't normally use magic. So what that really means is you could have a stone with fireball in it and give it to a warrior, and now that warrior has a one-time fireball, which is very cool and very useful. So he says these aren't spell gems, but they could be. So I suggest you look out for Nomi Path Shutter at the Earth Enclave, and she'll be able to set you up. And so the characters are like, oh, that's neat. He says the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a good word with the guards here to let you in. He says the third thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to tell anyone about your friend's bite there. And basically the party said, wow, that's great, thank you. And so they witnessed before them a few different things. First off, the gate to Blingdenstone is enormous, and it's made of pure adamantine metal, and it's got all kinds of protective features on it. It could withstand a siege easily. Second, the way up to the door is sloped in such a way that it would make, for example, carrying a battering ram very difficult. The third thing they notice is that the steps leading up to the gate are built for gnomish feet, and so anything of a size category medium or more finds them to be difficult terrain because they're not the right relative size for your feet, and so that's the first things they notice. And then once the guard kind of says, what's going on here, and Dasco says, look, these guys are fine. They're with me. They're running from the drow. The drow are pursuing them. They should probably speak to the Diggermatox. And the guard kind of looks everyone over and nods and says, okay, well, if you say so, Dasco, see you later, Pickshine. And so the guards escort them through. So after the gates open, they find that the next thing they walk through is this huge maze with, like, I think 20 feet tall walls, 20-foot tall walls, and the walls are barbed with nails, and it's a maze to get through, and so the guards lead them through. And then after the maze, the guard says, all right, well, we're almost there, we just have to go through the gauntlet now. And the gauntlet is this weird area of sloping sections. The guard says, these areas here can be flooded with poison gas should we need them to be, and all throughout the wall are embedded these stones that look like the ones the characters have been given. And so they're asking the guards questions, and the guard basically confirms, like, yeah, all of these are spell gems that can essentially just, go off if someone were to try and break in. And so the characters are recognizing that there is a huge amount of security to Blingdenstone, at the very least from people going from outer Blingdenstone to inner Blingdenstone. And so they kind of then get through the gauntlet, and the next set of doors opens up. And I really would like to read actually the little insert that it gives you on the characters first coming to Blingdenstone. So I'm just going to grab the book here, and I'm going to hopefully turn it to the right page. And I did. Haha! Okay, so they make it to inner Blingdenstone, and essentially it says, you leave the dark tunnel behind and step into what looks like another world. These aren't sinister drow caverns or harsh bare stone, but a subterranean land of warm colors and welcoming smells. The deep gnomes you see going about their business glance up at you with suspicion, but you instinctively understand that you face no threat here. One of the guards escorting you abandons his severe frown to give a deep nod as he prompts you past the inner gate. Welcome to Blingdenstone, travelers. And they're leaving these outer defenses which kind of paint a picture of a paranoid people under siege, but once they kind of get in there, they're seeing now some of the true character of the Deep Gnomes. This is perhaps the safest, friendliest, most normal place that they will be in the Underdark. Deep Gnomes are a good people, if not a little, wary of strangers due to their past. And of course, Blingdenstone itself is kind of, going from a destroyed ruin to a settlement on its way to trying to become a real city again. And so, there are huge areas that are cut off and purposely caved in. And there's lots of really interesting things that happen in Blingdenstone. Lots of areas for the characters to explore. Lots of side quests to get. I said that's where we ended our session off, and I said, well, you guys better have a proper quest guide next time, because there's going to be a lot of things for you guys to do here, which is good, because I am trying to get them prepped for like when they're done Blingdenstone, they will be at the halfway point of Out of the Abyss, and I'm trying to make sure that they're on the right pacing to kind of take on the next set of challenges. So, I'm making sure to throw lots of encounters at them, and they have lots to do, and I think that'll help to pump their level up a bit. I told Autumn Willow that her new character she's making will start at level 6. I have my other 3 or 4 characters are... They're in kind of staggered. I think that G-Man just hit level 5 this session. And then Valdusin, it would be the next one in line. He's got a ways to go. And then Ken is moderate. He's almost there, but he's not super close. And Colby only has like 1,500 more XP to go. So I wager that at the very least, we'll have 2 level 6s in the party next time, because Autumn Willow's character will be introduced at level 6, and odds are that Colby will hit level 6 next time. Because like I said, there's lots for them to do, and lots of choices to be made in Blingdenstone. So yeah, that's where we ended it off, and I'm really excited to sit down again this coming weekend and continue their adventure. I think they're really going to enjoy the people of Blingdenstone, the tasks of Blingdenstone, some of the challenges and conundrums that are presented, not all of them really even being combat based. There's a lot of kind of I always describe these as Mass Effect choices, because the video game Mass Effect, it reminds me of those types of situations where it's like, well, you have to resolve a conflict, but it might not be combat oriented, and your choices are going to have repercussions, right? So it's always fun when those are put in. I almost wish that this book had more of those, but it's really interesting in that one of the big things I've found with Out of the Abyss as an adventure and as a book is that it wants you, you're starting your players at level 1. The Underdark is like the most dangerous place in the world, and they don't let up on that right from the beginning. They want the players to feel that they have no resources, that they're really screwed, that everything's out to kill them, that, it's not a place to be mucking around in, that the danger is very real. And that is well established. And the characters learn from that and start to be a little more cautionary. But then what it doesn't lend itself well to is that means when a situation presents itself where maybe combat is not necessary, the characters have gone to a point where they have learned to err on the side of caution, and rather than talk to a monster, just kill it. Because it's probably just going to try and eat us, because this is the Underdark and everything's terrible. Now, if the characters are ever in a spot where maybe their resources were low or their health was low, they just had a fight and they haven't had time to recover or something, maybe then they might say, oh my god, if we try and fight this, we're just going to die, so let's try and talk our way out of it. I think that is one thing that would probably still happen. But other than that, I don't blame them for being in a position where a monster says, oh, you can get past my lair if you answer me with these 3 riddles, and the players are like, no, it's lying, kill it, and then they all just gank it, which is fine if that's what they want to do, absolutely, but it obviously it takes away from having some interesting role play experiences, but we'll see how the future works out. So starting next weekend, we'll be right into Blingdenstone. They're going to meet a lot of new characters, and I'm excited to do that. So thanks for watching. I'm going to be trying to do Players Pub sooner rather than later, because there's I think a lot has happened, and we'll be kind of switching gears from just, okay, well, who are you and who do you play and how have you been finding your character, into a little bit more of, maybe almost doing a player recap of the session and what they thought and get their perspective as players in Out of the Abyss rather than just having the DM's perspective. But then again, that's what this is. This is the DM's journal. So watch the Players Pub, watch the DM's journal. I always appreciate your viewership. Tell your friends if they're interested. If you know someone looking to run Out of the Abyss, they can. I'd be happy for them to watch the channel and gain some ideas or some insight. Like and subscribe to my channel if you find fit to do so. And other than that, we'll leave you there for today, and I can't wait to give you the next update.